So David Giuliano is a writer, speaker, and spiritual guide. His recent book, It's Good to Be Here, Stories We Tell About Cancer, is a spiritual memoir about his 20-year journey with cancer. He's an award-winning writer of more than 100 published articles, essays, and poems. His Postcards from the Valley, Encounters with Fear, Faith, and God was a Canadian bestseller. He's also published 2 illustrated children's books, The Alligator and Naomi's Pillow, and Jeremiah and the Letter E, and as stated, illustrated by the fabulous Maura O'Brien and Megan Rippon. David was the 39th moderator of the United Church of Canada, and now he lives in Marathon with his wife Pearl, who's also in the audience with us. David, thank you so much for being willing, and Pearl, to make the trek all the way here.
I'm going to try and use this microphone so you can hear. Culturally, we've been in North America for a long time, but for Italians, sometimes. So, discipline me if I'm passing it around too much. Okay, it is good to be here. And I always like to remind myself of that because in spite of the certainty I had of it in the worst moments in cancer care, I forget how good it is to be here. And it's good to be here with you and particularly with Enliven and all the kind of unique ways that you've created this community to get together. I wonder, though, if I could begin by finding out a little bit more about who you are. I mean, I don't make this up as I go, but I can adapt it a little bit. How many of you, and feel free not to answer if it feels too vulnerable to do that, how many of you right now or in the recent past have been in cancer treatment? Okay, yeah. How many of you have been taking care of someone who was in cancer treatment? Accompanying them? God bless you. That's hard work. Pearl's right here at the front, and I got to tell you, the people who companion us carry a much bigger load, I think, sometimes than those of us who are actually undergoing treatment. How many of you care professionally for people with cancer? Doctors, nurses, home care, spiritual guides, yoga instructors, physiotherapists, yeah. So you're here too. That's really great that we're here together, because the stories that we have to share with one another take on a fullness when we're together that is impossible to hold when we're separate. So I talked to Jackie, and I made copious notes about what she thought would be useful and helpful to you to speak about. And then I lost them. But I think that some of the things that she thought might be good to touch on were around spirituality, around the battle narrative that we sometimes are limited to in cancer care, and also the difference around, my understanding, the difference around healing and cure. And I hope that's going to help. I didn't look at my watch. Okay. So I need to say something about spirituality, because as Ali said, I am a United Church minister, and that makes some people nervous. Especially at secular events, they're concerned that, one of those Christians is going to show up. And I have given my life to a revolutionary mystic who lived 2,000 years ago, but I don't expect that everyone will. But on the other hand, I can't tell my story without referencing my spiritual life. But let me say it this way. It's descriptive, not prescriptive. As I told the people at Health Quality Ontario when they invited me to speak at their big event, and it's funny because they don't want to really just come out and say, would you not, proselytize or whatever, and so they're tiptoeing around, it's a lot of people from different, atheists, agnostics, Muslims. Finally I said, listen, if anyone gets born again and gives their life to Jesus as their Savior, it's not my fault. I won't. So I will try not to make that happen to you either. But it reminds me, though, how powerful spirituality is at that time in our life. And I think of an event when I was my last surgery, and I was in the hospital, and in the middle of the night they put a man in the bed in the room next to me. And in the morning we got talking, and I forget what he even came in for, but he was in a lot of pain, and we were just kind of talking about what was going on, and Pearl was there, and he was flirting shamelessly with her, I have to say, And turns out this guy is a producer of movies, action movies, and has been involved in like Men in Black, a lot of those kind of action type movies. He said he got his big break because he grew up at Jane and Finch. Those of you know Toronto, tough neighborhood, and he grew up there, single mom, but he got a break, and he says if you ever see the O'Henry Bar commercial from, I think it was the 70s, I'm the little brown boy in it. And he became quite successful, and at the time we met him, he was in a co-production relationship with a movie production industry from India. And so they were making Bollywood action films and just having a blast. Anyway, he gets a call from his agent, and it seemed like a good time for me to take a cruise around the unit and with my little walker. And so Pearl and I went out, give them some privacy. And they were going to send him home, but he said to me as he was getting ready to go, he says, my agent said, don't you leave there without praying with him. And I thought, for crying out loud, I'm a minister. I'm in the hospital, cut me some slack here. But no, he says, my agent said we have to pray. So he came over by my bed and took Pearl's hand and my hand. And, I did my, I kind of centered myself to pray. I was about to pray. And all of a sudden he started, God, we just want to thank you for this man and this woman and pray for his health. And I'm thinking, I was so shocked. And he had told me he's not a religious person. But somehow, in the experience and the encounter with his own mortality and mine, we awaken in some way. They used to say there's no atheists in foxholes. And they meant, you're afraid. But I don't think that's not what it's about. I think what it's about is that when we experience an encounter with our mortality, what we have is an awakening sometimes of the miracle of life, like that we're the one person on the planet who's exactly like us, and how cool is that? That suddenly relationships seem so much more rich and tender and personal, that we open ourselves in some ways to love in a new way. And that's the kind of spirituality I'm talking about. I'm not talking about some doctrine or those kind of things. So just, I say that as kind of a heads up. So if you hear me talking about these things, I'm not talking about conversion or those kind of things. I'm talking about the kind of awakening that is possible when we encounter our mortality. So healing and cure, we use those words interchangeably often, don't we? That, so-and-so got healed, so-and-so got cured of their cancer in our case. But I understand the word healing to be something more holistic, more organic, and that it may involve physical change and it may not. Whereas the word cure, I think, represents the elimination of symptoms, the recovery from illness, and those kind of things. And so healing can happen without being cured, and cure can happen without being healed. This is a part of my experience. Over 25 years ago now, I felt a lump in my forehead. I went to my family physician. I said, I have a lump in my forehead. He goes, yeah, there's something there. We should get it checked out. What I heard was, write your will, give up being at your children's wedding, think about whether it's okay for Pearl to marry again, all those things. And your mind goes there immediately. So I get in the car, and we were about 4 hours from Thunder Bay. So that's where we go for these kind of things. So I drove up, and the surgeon, Dr. Wellborn, cut it out of my head and was going to send it for a biopsy. But as he was doing it, he said, he says, you sure you never had an injury here on the side of your head? And I said, no, I have never had an injury there that I can remember, really. And he says, it just looks like scar material. It looks like you have a scar here on your temple. And as a spiritual person, when I hear the word a scar on your temple, there's kind of a bing. So I ate my cookie and drank my apple juice and got in the car and drove home. And all the way I thought about what is the scar on the holy places and who I am as a person. And even all of those of us who've had a great childhood and really not a lot of trauma in it, even those of us who've been there know that there is a sacred place in us, a holy place, a special place that sooner or later experiences some wounding. And so for over the next probably 3 years, I spent a lot of time thinking about my dream life, thinking about my conversations with a spiritual director who I met with monthly at that time, and just reflecting on what is the wound near my temple that might be an invitation. And I grew, my life deepened in a lot of ways through that reflection. I was not cured, but there was healing in it. You see what I mean about the two differences? And I think those of you who've been there may know that. You may have experienced it. And I also know people who go through this whole process and are can still be angry and fearful and blaming and all kinds of things as well. So you can be cured and not healed, and you can be healed and not cured. Well, the other words that really struck me, some of the other words that really struck me was Thomas King, 2003 Massey Lectures. If you haven't read them, they're really worth reading around Indigenous life in Canada and so on. But the line that struck me is he says, the truth about stories is that is all we are. All we are the stories we hear and the stories we tell. That's what makes us. That's what creates us. And you know how true it is, right? I mean, right now, you look at the news cycle, how destructive and despairing it can be. As children, we're told stories about who we are, and we take on that identity, whether it feels true or not. It begins to shape us, either in resistance against it or acceptance of it. And as communities, we tell stories about one another and about what it means to be in community. Like, think about the community you live in. Do we tell stories about good neighbors, about trusting, about compassion? Or do we tell stories about home invasions or people you can't trust and those kind of things? I mean, because we create that reality through the stories we tell. And I think if you take a minute to do some reflecting on it, you can probably identify the story that has shaped you most since childhood, and that it formed your personality in many ways. So I began to think about, what are the stories we tell about cancer? What are the stories that we talk about to say what's going on here? Now, in the traditional religious perspective, it was, God's teaching you a lesson, God is testing you, or God is punishing you. I don't think there's too many of us who still hold to that kind of theology, though I think on the fringes of various religions, it's still there. But we have to be careful not to get too smug about that, because we have the secular version of it, right? It goes like this. If you are physically active, eat right, go to yoga, Yeah. And they go back and forth about whether drinking a little red wine is good for you or not. I'm sticking with a little bit is good. But you know, if you do all the right things, when you meditate and everything, you know, you won't get sick. That was me. I actually, at least subconsciously, believed that. Like I mountain bike, I run, I sea kayak, cross-country ski in the winter. I stick to that one glass of red wine. I meditate, I eat well, and I got cancer. See, wow, that's a ripoff. That's not fair. But so many of these stories we tell are like about blaming and shaming the person who's ill, because it's a way of protecting ourselves from the notion that it could happen to us. The other one I hear a lot, and I'm going to avoid eye contact because I'm sure people in this room have said it. Everything happens for a reason. Bam, I punch you in the nose. That happened for a reason. I was pissed off. I think what we're trying to say when we say that really is we can find meaning in it. That we can redeem this experience of suffering, that we can make something good of it. But the idea of suggesting that there's this cosmic fate that causes everything to happen for a reason is really offensive to people who are suffering, like Holocaust victims. How can we possibly suggest that happened for a reason, though a lot of people found meaning in it? So those are some of the stories, and of course, what's the number one battle, right? Obituary after obituary. Yeah. Having lost a long battle with cancer. Like, I'm sure that the battle narrative can be helpful, but if it's the only narrative we have, it creates a lot of problems. I read recently that people who have undergone cancer treatment have the same percentage of post-traumatic stress disorder as soldiers who have been in combat have. Wow. And so you think, wow, well, of course, because we've been in battle too. And that's been the only narrative. There isn't permission to say, what I'd really like to do is curl up in the bed in the arms of someone who loves me and weep. That's what we want to do. But that would make us failures. That would make us cowards. That would make us weak. And we have to be strong for the battle. I also think that it's worth remembering that it's a nasty part of who I am, but cancer is part of my body. So being at war with my own body is kind of counterintuitive in my mind. But it's the loser part that I think is something we have to really wrestle with. Like, sure, we need to marshal our inner strength, we need to marshal our community to work with us and care for us and take care of us. But when we define death as being a loser, that's a very wounding kind of way of understanding it and seeing it. Let me tell you about 3 losers. First, Terry Fox. He lost. He didn't make it. He had to give up his run in 1980 in Thunder Bay, just about 100 kilometers out of the city. There's a big monument to him now up on the cliff if you go there. But he lost. He lost his battle. And yet 40 years later, I'm walking through Huntsville, and there are children running around the Huntsville Public School for Terry Fox Day. 40 years, their parents were not yet born. And yet, Terry Fox, who's radically transformed our understanding of cancer and its role and has raised millions of dollars for cancer research, lost. Jack Layton. You know, the pundits said during that last campaign, Jack Layton shouldn't use that cane. It makes him look weak. Remember, he had a cane he was using. And he insisted on using it and needed it. Afterwards, they said, I think it was the authenticity of the cane that led to the Orange Crush. And more recently, of course, Gord Downey, the tragically hip, who gave the last year of his life and competence and capability to raising awareness in Canada about Indigenous people in residential schools. And you think about that, like, it's an invitation for all of us really to think about what will we give our life to, because it's no big secret, we will all die someday. But the experience of our mortality, the brush with it, means that we think about what's most important, and that's what he did. Gord Downey was also a loser. He lost the battle. Hey, what's going on there? That those who lost seem to have the greatest influence on transformation. Here's a little bit about my story. In 2006, I was elected moderator of the United Church of Canada. If you're not familiar with that, I was the senior elected official for the national church and the spiritual leader of our church. They're a 3-year term. And I was ridiculously confident about it. I thought, oh, this is perfect. This is what I did. And I told people, don't be afraid. We have to take big risks to become this new place, come into this new way of being church. You know, I was young. I think I was the youngest moderator, the second youngest one ever elected, 46 at the time, and you know, I had 3 master's degree, diploma in spiritual direction, another one in expressive arts therapy. I was a great speaker in my own opinion, and had an unbelievable. See, I'm so glad Doug and Marlene Mara are here because they remember when I had hair. I had great hair. I had 2 eyebrows. I had it all going for me. And after I was installed at the big indoor track thing at Lakehead University. Pearl and I walked home, and you know, the northern lights are shining, and you know, the stars, and we walked over the little river that goes through campus, and I just had this sense of, you know, having arrived at this place of authority and power that I was about to, you know, execute and transform the whole church single-handedly, you know, because I'm such an amazing person. And as we were going to sleep that night, I felt I had another lump. And at this point, I probably had 8 surgeries, just lumpectomies. And they kept telling me, oh, you know, it's not malignant. It's benign, but it's a dirty little thing that you can't get rid of. It's like mushroom spores. They just come, so they keep cutting away at it. Lift my scalp off my head periodically and scrape it out, and you know. But I don't know. Crap, I'll have to get that taken care of. So because I was living in Toronto then, I went to Sunnybrook and they did the biopsies again, and he said, we redid all the slides. He says, this has been malignant for years, like from the beginning. He said some other things. I have no idea what else he said. You know, any of you who've been in that appointment, you know. You hear the word malignant. And so I entered into almost a full 3 years of cancer treatment. I had a major surgery. I say major surgery. This is my theory. Major surgeries are anything that's done to me. Minor surgeries happen to other people. You know? Keep that in mind. Don't let anyone tell you something being done to you is a minor surgery. It's major, brother. Believe me. So I had some pretty major surgery, and I had 9 weeks of radiation therapy, and including put a scoop up in my eye so they could do it there and not blind me, and all kinds of crazy stuff. But what was interesting is I began to experience my own brokenness, my own frailty. And that rather than beginning to lead from a place of power, I began to ask, what is it like to lead from a place of fragility? And my staff in the office there, their immediate reaction, and the comment about being lonely, partly it's goodwill, I think, but they say, well, you go home and take care of yourself. We'll take care of things here and come back when you're better. And I thought, why do I have to go home? I'm going to be weak. I'm going to be frail. Get rid of the second desk in my office and put a sofa in there. Because I laid on that couch and made a lot of phone calls over that time. And when I went to visit people in churches who were struggling, I began to ask, what does it mean to be authentic about the frailty we're experiencing and loss of numbers and those kind of things? When I went to Guatemala and Nicaragua and to Iqaluit and to Palestine, I met people not from a place of we're this charitable organization that's going to help you out, but as friends, as people. It wasn't that I had that ability, but I was open in a new way because of that vulnerability. Some of you may have read or seen the TED Talk, Brene Brown. If you haven't, please have a look at it. It's very powerful stuff, because what it is about the power of vulnerability. And we don't really know about that until we experience our own vulnerability. I think of Greta Thunberg right now. This little girl, she's tiny. And she's in one sense powerless. But in the other sense, her vulnerability and her sense of clarity about the purpose of her life right now is very powerful. And so we begin sometimes in cancer treatment and care and our experience of cancer to come to understand our own brokenness and our own vulnerability in ways that opens us up to beauty, to miracle, to wonder, to love. And in ways we couldn't maybe before. So I started referring to my cancer as my unwelcome blessing. I wasn't glad I had cancer. I wasn't grateful for it. But I came to understand it through that lens of that vulnerability. Leonard Cohen says, everything's cracked, that's how the light gets in. Well, the Apostle Paul said it 2,000 years earlier, but he said, we have this treasure in earthen vessels. In other words, there is this sacred divinity in each one of us, and that we can only really experience it until that vulnerability, till the vessel is cracked, till we realize the fragility of our bodies and of one another's bodies, that it becomes whole. And so for me at that time, it became the story that became healing for me was one of leading from a place of vulnerability rather than from a place of power. And it was a gift. It was a gift. I could have missed the gift. It didn't happen for a reason, but there was healing in it. Keeping an eye on my watch. One of the other stories that became important for me was the story of pilgrimage, or the story of the Camino. Some of you are familiar with Caminos, Spain, all that kind of thing. But there's inward Caminos too that we make in our lives. And so I began to kind of plumb, as my cancer became chronic over many years, it was less a momentary thing than a journey, an ongoing thing. And so I began to think about it in that way. And Matthew Fox, some of you may be familiar with Matthew Fox. He was a Roman Catholic priest. He's an Episcopal priest now, and started the Center for Creation Spirituality at Berkeley. He wrote the book Original Blessing as a counter voice to the original sin idea. And it's a very beautiful book. But he talks about there being 4 paths, and not necessarily within one particular faith, but at 4 paths of spirituality. The first is the via positiva, Latin, he used Latin, the positive path. Things like the birth of a child, falling in love, the glory of the trees in autumn in Huntsville. You know, like we can experience something holy, something beautiful, something sacred in the positive things in life. The other is creativity, that we can through art and music, and so enjoyed the singing and playing as we came in tonight. I experienced the presence in some way through your creativity tonight. Thank you. And the other is through transformation, being part of social justice or charity, that we can encounter that. And those of you who maybe joined in the climate strike on Friday, or I don't know if yours was on Friday here, but the I keep hearing news people asking, well, did it make a difference? Will it make a difference? Well, of course it'll make a difference, because it changed the lives of anyone who stood there. It made them more aware, and they experienced a sense of community and belonging with others who care about those things. And then there's the via negativa. Then there is the path of suffering. And so within cancer, I began to think about how we follow on that path, how suffering can become a source of deepening relationship. And I, in a group like this, I don't feel like I need to explain that too much, because I'm sure in your journey, many of you experienced the deepening of friendships, the care, the intimacy with a partner or a family member, the wonder of this group, this community, gathering together to support and address loneliness, the attentiveness to beauty, and it's amazing having. I'm very well, by the way, right now. I realize I forgot to say that I'm healthy. Everything's good. No need to worry. But it's almost like I have a hard time hanging on to that after. I swear I'll never see the world the same. Never. Like, I have been so changed by this. But a few years later, I'm getting twisted up about things that maybe don't matter that much. So time-wise here, I do want to tell you one of my favorite story, just because I like to tell it as part of it. But another narrative for me is about wolves. Kids will ask me, right? You may have noticed I've had some work done. I always say I'm like the poster boy for the difference between plastic surgery and cosmetic surgery. I'm not better looking for it, but I'm alive, which is good, But kids, they're so, they're just curious, right? So, and it's usually a boy who will say it. I at around 8 will say, "What happened to your face?" And I go like this. Wolves. I was attacked by wolves. And the little kid goes, "Really?" He wants to go along with me. I said, "Oh yeah, I was skiing out on the lake and the wolf pack came towards me." They jumped and I ripped. Yeah, you're a parent. I can hear the parents in the room going, "What are you thinking?" Some of the parents of little children used to say to me, "You had better be at our house at bedtime tonight." But I go into the big story, but I fought these wolves off. They did manage to bite me and so on. Eventually the parent intervenes and says, "He was not attacked by wolves, he had cancer." Which means nothing to an 8-year-old. Attacked by wolves, he gets it. And if you think about it, which is more true? Let me tell you, I've had two major surgeries where flesh was taken from my back and my shoulder blade and put in here. where then again I have a scar from here to here on my thigh where they got skin for the next patch and they put a titanium mesh thing in there. I underwent radiation therapy that resulted in 3 subsequent eye surgeries, and the surgery from the last surgery I have double vision. So it looks like there's a really big crowd here. Great. I had, as a result of the radiation, I had a stroke. I can't even list them all. So isn't it easier just to say I was attacked by wolves? Like, that makes sense to me. And you have your own stories. You have your own ways of talking about these things. I wanted to share something with those of you who are here who care for people with cancer professionally. I got to see Dr. Brian Goldman the other morning this week. He was in Owen Sound. And his new book is The Power of Kindness. And in 1925, Francis Peabody, Dr. Francis Peabody, said pretty much the same thing to the medical school at Harvard. He said, the secret to caring for the patient is to care for the patient. The patient. To care about them. I have a dear friend, some of you may have run into her, she's everywhere, Dr. Sarah Newberry, and we own a cottage here with she and her partner and Pearl and I own a cottage together. And so while I was in hospital the last time, she would send us daily updates about what was happening in town. And actually at the time she was the president of the Ontario College of Family Physicians. But anyway, she would send these updates. And she would say, you know, Harold and Mary Quinn were at potluck on Friday night. You know, the train blocked the road for a long time today. You know, just news. It kind of made me feel at home. But in one of them she said this, I hope that all of the people who are taking care of you understand that they are engaged in the manifestation of love. And how, you know, it was stunning to hear it. And I immediately knew the people who were taking care of me that way and the ones who weren't. And she wasn't talking about, you know, hugging me and whatever, but understanding that what we're doing when we care for people with cancer or with any illness is manifesting love in the world, caring in a way that is transformative, caring in a way, and you know the person. It doesn't take time. The woman who, when you come to check in for MRI, looks up and says, how are you doing today? And she actually waits to hear the answer, you know? Or the doctor who laughs a little when I tease him, you know? Or, you know, those kind of things. Just that human contact is so important. And so I share that story for those of you who maybe get tired. And that's what Brian Goldman was saying, you know, was that a family came to him and told him that he wasn't kind, that he had been caring for people efficiently, but he wasn't kind. And they were really hurt by his unkindness. And he went on a whole year of trying to figure out what that's about. And so I would just say it's good to be here with you. As I say, anyone who's been going through cancer treatments for 25 years, it's good to be anywhere. It's good to be here with you, and I appreciate your kindness in inviting us here to spend some time together, so thank you.